Hello YouTube. Hello YouTube indeed, and welcome to this week's video. With the announcement of 9th edition and Necrons being the new hotness, a lot of people are going to be interested in how to paint them at the moment. So I wanted to show you my approach to something similar to the copper and silver with green weapons kind of scheme that you see on a lot of the box art and stuff like that. It's a slightly different approach to that which maybe Games Workshop would show you, but hopefully it's going to give you just a little bit of a nicer result with not too much extra effort. Let's head to down cam and look at painting some Necrons. Okay, let's make a start with some Thrash metal from scale 75 then. It's going to be our base colour for the majority of our Necron Lord. And we're just going to give it a quick dry brush all over. So I'm just pulling my dry brush tissue onto the camera here just to show you how little paint I use when I'm dry brushing. That's a catch point for a lot of people. They load very heavy when they dry brush and then wonder why they can't get that subtle effect. The key really is to go very, very light, and if you need to reload, then reload. So I'm just going to speed that up now as I tank through the rest of the miniature and just get a nice, even dry brush of that Thrash metal all over. This mini is an eBay rescue, so there are a few little inconsistencies in the surface, which the dry brush does pick up. It's a bit unfortunate, but I did strip it fairly thoroughly. It's just sometimes you can't avoid a bit of surface dinging where a miniature has been painted and then had all of that paint removed. So, but it does just, you know, make the miniature look a bit more old and dangerous. Now we're into some old copper, again, scale 75. And we're going to start picking out all of those copper details. Shoulders, the bit in the centre of the back cape, the little loincloth at the front, all that kind of thing. Just get a nice even coat. I do thin my metallics. I use Painter's Milk from the Painter's Bakery as like an all-purpose medium. Scale 75 metallics take thinning fairly well, which is why I tend to favour them. As you can see, this old copper goes on very, very easily. Gives really good coverage. It's a great metallic. Just making sure that we hit all of the details now that we want to be copper. And that does involve just a little look around the miniature every now and again, just to make sure that you're sort of happy that that particular part that you want to paint copper is going to look good that way. Decided to accent the little detail on his chest there as well. There you go. So with our two base colours on, he's already starting to look pretty good. Now we're going to start chasing some depth and some effect and a bit of drama. First of all, that's going to involve an oil wash with burnt umber and ivory black. If you don't know how to do an oil wash, my Death Guard video is probably a good place to find out. You can find that a little bit further down on my YouTube, but we're just going to hit this all over. The reason that we've chosen to favour an oil wash here over an acrylic wash is simply because we can control the amount of surface staining far better with an oil wash. You'll see in the next step when we start removing it that we have complete control over where we allow the surface to be stained. So now I've just got some white spirit, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Just making decisions as to how I want the surface staining to look, where I want the surfaces to be fairly clean and silvery, and where I want that dark brown to be allowed to settle. We can still come back and make further modifications, and we actually do that towards the end of this video, but it's just very quick to set up your shade this way. You know, you can just kind of slap that oil wash on all over the miniature and then dry it with a hairdryer. It takes 5 minutes, and then you pop back in with the white spirit and you just start to kind of move the wash away from any areas where you don't think it should be sat. Okay, we're going to highlight next, just going back to Thrash metal and the dry brush. And because we darkened it down with that oil wash, we don't really need to use a highlight colour. We can just highlight with the same colour. And you can see I'm just sort of being a bit picky here, targeting areas that I think need to pick up a bit more light, need to be a bit brighter. just throw in some dry brush all over. It's very straightforward, this part of the process. And there we go. He's looking pretty. Into some Victorian brass next. This is going to be our first highlight for the copper areas. Victorian brass is a bit lower coverage than the old copper. And so what I actually end up doing with this, I start off edge highlighting it in, and then I sort of start feathering it in. Just to kind of smoothen off the blends a little bit. It looked a bit stark when I first put it down. It was kind of the only colour that I had on hand that made sense to highlight a copper with. You may have a different preferred sort of triad of paints for using for copper, but you can see here when I started feathering it, it starts to look a lot better than when it was just in as an edge highlight. Just quick, simple stuff. Touring around, finding those edges, painting a straight line around them. You've seen an edge highlight a million times before. You know the deal by now. And again, a little bit more feathering there, just with some thinned down version of the same colour. So that's how it looks after the first highlight on the copper. And now we're going to hit another highlight on the copper with some Elven gold from Scale 75, but this really is just going to be a little pinpoint. There's not going to be a ton to do here, so you'll just see me kind of coming around and finding these little sharp edges where I want light to catch. Just giving them a tiny little dab with this Elven gold. Again, this one's not super high coverage, so it's kind of okay to just sort of dot it about here and there, because as it dries it tends to settle back into what's underneath it anyway. It doesn't really stand out super bright. Still want to be fairly sparing with it just so as to not overpower the copper. I do want this to read as a sort of red metallic or an orange metallic. And there you go, copper all highlighted. Nice and straightforward. Okay, so with the copper done and the silver done, I think it's time to get into the bit that you all came for, the glowy green stuff. You're going to like this bit. Right, we'll start off our glowy bits then with some Corax white from Citadel. This is just so that I can get a nice base to paint all the glowy effect on. So anything that's going to be glowy green, I'm now going to fill in with Corax white. Very straightforward. I was being a little bit careful here on this kind of slotted area at the front of the weapon, and then I realised I needed to repaint the surrounding area black anyway, so I just started chucking it in. When it comes to the blade here, you'll notice where I hairdryered my oil washes, I did sort of have a couple of little areas where the oil wash wasn't 100% dry. And so there was a little bit of pooling as I was trying to paint over that. It's something to watch out for because sometimes you can't see it, but don't panic if it happens. As you can see here, I just kind of painted a couple of extra coats over it, and it soon goes away and calms down and behaves normally again. It's not anything to be alarmed by. It's just one of those things that can happen when working with oil washes. Just dropping in his eyes in white there as well, because again I want glowy eyes. And getting that blade nice and strong with white. Alright, that's all my green areas prepped now, I think. There we go. For the start of the green effect itself, Moot green, Citadel layer paint, thinned to high heaven. This is a glaze in the truest sense. It's going to be so thin that when it first goes on, you're not even going to see it going on properly. Essentially, you want to think about this first approach kind of how you would shading. So you're sort of looking, if you take the area that you want most glowy to be white, and then you want to start moving away from that with the glaze. So I want the tops of all of my orbs to be the glowing part. So I'm sort of starting around halfway on my orbs and I'm glazing downwards. So we'll speed up now and you'll see me just thrashing through that. It takes a few coats to start getting this going. And it is an effect where you want to kind of shrink the size of the glazes as you go down a little bit, but you're shrinking by really, really small margins as you're building up coats. It's something that you have to sort of develop a bit of a feel for. It is easy, but it's kind of tricky to explain. You just think about it as just slightly shrinking those glazes each time. And what that'll do is it'll intensify them more towards the bottom, and it'll create sort of a bit of a softer transition towards the top. We're not actually necessarily looking for soft transitions on all of these anyway. You're going to see that when we come back in later. And I'm now just going to slow the footage down again a second just to show you what I did with the blade. So on the bottom half of the sharp part of the blade, I'm glazing in towards the middle. Then in the lower central section, I'm glazing down towards the bottom. On the back sharp blade, I'm glazing again in towards the middle. And then in the top section of the blade, I'm glazing up towards the top. What I'm essentially trying to do here is create the glowiest part of the blade to appear to be the sort of center mass of the blade, as if the glow intensifies towards the center mass of the blade. So what I'm really doing essentially is just always pushing outwards from the center mass. It starts to look a bit rough at this stage, but do bear with me. Do bear with me, it gets better. Okay, so that's what you've got at this stage, and I'm just zooming it in here to show you properly. It's one of those, it's got to be ugly before it starts to look pretty. So we're now going to grab Boreal Green from Scale 75. I swear this is my pet colour. I try and shoehorn it into almost every workup these days. And this is where we're going to start accentuating now that glowy, glazy thing. So we're still thinned right back to a glaze at this stage. We're super, super thin. And we're just picking the most intense parts of our green glazes here. And we're fortifying them with this Boreal Green. And because it's a glaze, what it's going to do is filter over that very yellowy Moot green, and it's going to take a lot of the blue tone out of the Boreal Green. And that's why we choose a blue tone green in the first place, because if we chose more of a pure green with less blue in it, we'd actually end up with something that leans too far towards yellow and it wouldn't have as much impact. So that's why we've chosen like a deep turquoise. There are Citadel equivalents to this in both the contrast and main ranges. And again, slowing down for the blade just to show you that idea again of glazing away from the center mass. So on this top sort of chunky bit we go up, on the bottom chunky bit we go down, and then on the two sharp edges we go in towards the middle. And Mr. Shy really needs to learn how to stay in camera sometimes. This was it was tricky because the miniature is you know, it's, if you think about it in height, width, depth, it's actually deeper than it is high. So it was very hard to find a camera position sometimes when I was working on the blade especially. But we muddled through. We muddled through. And as you can see, as you start to build up a few more coats of that Boreal Green, it really does start to fade through into the Moot Green. You may find you have to go back to Moot Green and glaze out the opposite direction a little now and again, just to kind of smooth those blends. But it works pretty easy. Again, I just sped up for a second there because that whole section of footage at the start of this was off camera and out of focus, and I'm a terrible YouTuber. But what I'm doing here basically is just stippling white back in towards the tops of the orbs. This is going to create a kind of flowing energy sort of feel throughout the orbs. And then we're also going to highlight the blade with Corax white as well. So this is just Corax again. It's the same white that we were using before. I also missed the glowy bits in the centre of his chest. As we progress through the workup here, you will see me sort of address those, but I did miss them on the first pass. A bit of pure Boreal Green there as well for the sides of the blade that we haven't yet touched, and then a quick edge highlight with white. Also sort of slash a few little strokes across there. You can see that now. It's pretty easy to read what I've done there, but if you aren't sure, feel free to drop a comment and I'll explain it in a little bit more detail. I think it's fairly simple to grasp what I did with the blade though. Some Citadel Mephiston red now from their base range. This is just to do the grip of the weapon. It's the only time it appears on the whole miniature. And we're just going to very carefully paint it in, leaving the gaps between the little sections of grip in pure black. This is just a very quick way that I sometimes do weapon grips when they're not really that much of an important part of the sculpt. You almost kind of want them to just sit there in a complementary colour and make everything else look good, you know. So I chose red for this because it's a complement to green. What that means essentially is it makes green look good. They're on roughly opposite sides of the colour wheel, or, you know, approximately there. And that means that when you put them together, they create a clash that looks appealing to the eye. So I chose red essentially just to make all my greens look nicer. It's the same reason for choosing copper as well. And then I've just lightened that colour a bit with some skeleton bone from Reaper MSP. I forgot to take a shot of it. I know I normally do, but I'm literally just painting straight edge highlights between each section. Very, very straightforward. It's just a bit of skeleton bone added to the red. And again, you'll see the same there. Now, coming up on this looking pretty done, I decided here that I wanted to grab some Army Painter Strong Tone and just improve the contrast on the copper a little bit. Once you see the context of all the other colours, sometimes you can just sort of say, no, maybe that does need to just pop a touch more. I'd removed a lot of the surface staining back in the oil wash on this section. I ended up regretting that a little bit, so hence why you see me now just throwing some Strong Tone. You notice the eyes have also had a glaze of Boreal green there to make them pop a bit more. Now that that's looking all fabulous, we've got ourselves a pretty tasty Necron. There we go. One last look while the paint is wet, but once that paint is dry, we end up with something more like this. And I am very, very happy with this workup. I feel like it really still captures the essence of the classic Games Workshop Necron colour scheme. But as a workup, it's just got a few more slightly interesting things going on with it. And they're all very simple to execute things. The only thing I did off camera here was just a spot of gloss varnish on the orbs. I really like gloss varnishing things that should be shiny. It's a taste thing. You definitely don't have to do it. But I think it's kind of cool. And then just as we come into this very last rotation here, we're just going to slow down so you can look at that menacing face for a second or two more. What a cool miniature. And there you have it. Quick, straightforward, nice and simple Necrons. Still painted in that copper and silver colour scheme that we're quite used to seeing, and don't get me wrong, there are loads of great variations. But I really wanted to show that one because I feel like it's the one that a lot of people just really identify with when it comes to Necrons. So I really hope that you found that useful. But now on to an extra little bonus thing. I decided to celebrate 9th edition Warhammer 40k coming out, which I personally am very excited for. I wanted to give this miniature to somebody. So one of you viewing this video right now could well be in with a chance of winning it. All I need you to do, there's a Twitter link down in the description of this video. Go find me on Twitter. There'll be a post on my Twitter profile that relates to this miniature. That'll tell you what to do to enter the giveaway. Nice and simple. So folks, please don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe. Your support really does mean the world to growing a new channel. I appreciate it so, so much. And I'll see you later this week with some quick tips. Thanks for watching.